Are the students in your graduate school programs and people in your other professional environments as diverse as they should be? If not, then why is that? And what steps should be taken next? Hello there, this is Bradley, and you're listening to Psych Everywhere, a podcast by PsyChi, the International Honor Society in Psychology. For this show, distinguished guests weigh in on applying psychology findings to a diverse range of contemporary issues and bettering your life. This episode was made possible through a special PsyChi sponsorship with CSPP Alliant International University. If you'd like to learn about graduate programs at CSPP, be sure to check out the link in the show notes for this episode. Guiding our conversations about recruiting diverse people, our guest speaker today is Dr. Julie Green from, you guessed it, CSPP Alliant International University. Dr. Green is an Eastern Band Cherokee and African American associate professor and clinician. She has taught for 7 years in the clinical PsyD department at CSPP. She teaches foundations in multicultural psychology, family therapy with ethnic families, and qualitative research methods. She obtained her PhD in clinical psychology from the University of North Dakota and completed postdoctoral studies at UC Berkeley School of Public Health and UCSF. Dr. Green has leadership experience within APA Division 35, the Society of the Psychology of Women, Section 6, Alaska Native American Indian Women. She is the current member-at-large Native American slate within Division 45 and has worked in community mental health for more than 15 years. She conducts research and advocates in the following areas: intimate partner violence, Native American women and social determinants of health, indigenous feminist-focused mentorship, as well as strategies for recruitment, retention, and assist with the matriculation of ethnically diverse graduate psychology students. Dr. Green, welcome to Psych Everywhere.
Good morning, and thank you.
I want to thank you for taking the time to speak with me today. I'm going to start with sort of a big picture question, and then we'll kind of narrow in a little, I think. So my first question is this: is the field of psychology as diverse as it should be? And how has that sort of changed over time?
Of course, it's not as diverse as it should be. Right? Right? No, it's not. It needs to be more diverse. I think that psychology exists in lots of places. How our world is, it's very much based and focused in on the European American experience. However, that has shifted, right? The field incorporates, and really, I think there are more probably women in the field. I think there are probably more white women in the field. I think that's how it's kind of represented currently. But there are so many diverse perspectives and voices and genders represented within our field. And I think that's the beauty of it, that over time, it naturally progresses and changes and shifts to reflect the folks who are showing up and needing the services. So I think that natural lens shift over time is important. And I think it also is important that the folks that we recruit and support to be a part of that is reflective of who's showing up and needs the services too.
What would you say are some of the main reasons now why diverse students might not seek out graduate school programs?
Why now, in the middle of a pandemic? In the middle of the racial injustices and inequities and accessibilities? That probably is why. I mean, it's expensive to engage in this field. And when folks don't understand the debt that is often tied to engaging in this field, or if they're in the middle of it and they're like, wait a minute, I have to incur more debt, or this is what the process is. So first generation folks don't get that glance into these are the things without supportive mentorship and kind of guidance, or someone in the family even saying oh, these are the steps. And then other folks who might have the access and luxury of doing this, they may be encouraged to be involved with it, but sometimes it's a long process. So whether it's 5 or 6 years of preparation, in addition to clinical training thereafter, in addition to licensure thereafter, once you graduate, it's a long process. It's expensive. It certainly is a privileged space to be in. And then it can be difficult if you're contending with imposter syndrome or all these things, these messages from others that or even internally that make you feel like, oh, you shouldn't be here, or the things that you're studying or you're engaged in or that you think aren't important. That could be a really challenging walk for folks, ethically diverse folks who are engaged in this, or marginalized folks who are pursuing this work. And then when you get out, if you aren't licensed, if you don't have like a solid kind of workspace, the payoff isn't too great, right? So getting paid when you don't have all the things, if you're not well equipped or well networked, can be a challenge too. So it's like, I incurred this debt to now be right to not be able to pay the bills. So you're taking on lots of work. So it's all these things that folks, again, without like thinking through or having a real solid plan or kind of knowing like how to kind of support yourself through this, it could be really challenging to navigate through and feel like you actually can be self-sustaining kind of through this process.
Tell us about some of the research in your lab addressing recruitment and retention and matriculation of ethnically diverse graduate psych students. What are some strategies you found to be effective that would help universities attract more diverse individuals?
I have a couple of students. So one student who has gone through and looked at examine the experiences of graduate psychology students from various ethnically diverse backgrounds. And so she examined microaggressions that they may have endured as they engage in their programs, explored how meaningful mentorship was in terms of like navigating their programs, and other kind of barriers that might be in place that kind of restricted kind of their experience. And some of the outcomes of that work is that like all of these things kind of create stressors for folks. As I kind of mentioned, like these financial barriers, these kind of racialized barriers, these experiences that within whether their practicum or their educational experiences that create these kind of barriers for ethically diverse students getting through their programs. But when these students have proper mentorships and supports in place, they were able to successfully get through without these levels of trauma that other students who didn't have supportive mentorship, supportive institutions, supportive academic climates. So when the climate was supportive of their experience, or that someone showed up and said, hey, you could do this, or like, here's a resource for you, or facilitated some kind of direction for them, these students were able to get through. So, and thinking about like, okay, so like the meaningfulness around that is like, can we assure like policies to make sure like we've got mental health supports, we've got financial supports in place for students that we invite into our institutions to get through? Are there additional efforts that we might put into place so that like these next hurdles, maybe after they graduate around licensure, can also be minimized, or we can reduce the stress around whether financial stress or study skills stress can be, supported so they can get through that next hurdle. And then facilitating connections with like alumni and these graduate students, perhaps a mentorship space to be established, so that way that there's this give back. So folk want to come back and support these students. That's an additional layer of like mentorship that can be developed and facilitated and help these students kind of get through that process. Another kind of up and coming work that we're looking at is the trauma that's often tied to the graduate students' experience, particularly around Black and Indigenous folks. Like we're dealing with, whether it's family and historical kind of trauma, and then the everyday traumas that we're having to engage in, whether it's race-based kind of stress, race-based trauma, in addition to like having to show up being this professional person in a space where you're often not welcomed, or you're this visual representation of all the things. It can be really stressful. And so getting through that program successfully is particularly challenging. Again, moving forward to licensure, sometimes it's waylaid, or folks don't go forward because they're contending with like just having to heal and repair after this really challenging experience. So I'm curious as to like what is going on, how are folks navigating that, how are folks coping, how do they heal, and what are some radical ways in which we might actually show up and support Black and Indigenous folks who are going through these things. Again, I'm part of a mentorship program currently, or a supportive program within my PsyD department, and I do additional kind of work around Indigenous students, graduate and undergraduate experience, and the stories are the same, and there's similar barriers that they're contending with. And it just feels like so overwhelming for them. And there needs to be a greater effort to actually facilitate their processes much better. So research around these areas and interventions around these areas are critical, and specific policies within institutions need to happen. One, I think, additional effort CSPP can actually engage in, especially around tribal communities. Right? So we're on Kumeyaay land, right? I wanted to acknowledge that we are stewards of the Kumeyaay Nation, this land. However, there's no partnerships. There's no land agreements with the local tribes. San Diego State actually has a great land acknowledgement, and they have subsequent programs that are in place to support students, undergrad and graduate students at their institution, right? So they're creating a way, whether it's through scholarships, mentorships, spaces to help connect students within the field, and so that they can go back to community and start healing and connecting, and again, pulling folks through and having them show up in community in certain ways. That's a great opportunity that CSPP can show up. We have so many different offerings of educational tools, teaching, clinical work, business, the law. Like, there's so many ways that we could show up for the tribal communities, for lots of ethnically diverse communities. But creating a land acknowledgement is one step that they can engage in. And then subsequent programs where they can show up and really be effective and supportive for communities. Perhaps even developing like a community clinical satellite so that training opportunities can happen for our students and for support, mental health support for local communities, if that's in fact what local communities want. So that partnership would need to include a needs assessment. Like, what are the things that you need and how might we be able to support you in that way? So that's just like one thing that I'm like thinking, this is something that can happen. It needs to happen. And similar efforts like that in ethnically diverse communities all around, in schools all around, can happen. We have the ability. It's just a matter of like, are we willing to stretch ourselves? Are we willing to be like, can we radically engage in this effort? Can we imagine something different?
Well, these are great examples. I always love examples, but I like the idea of mentorships and connecting back to alumni, finding these unique ways to connect with people in their places. I wondered, could you share some steps that your own school, Alliant, has taken, to recruit and maintain diverse students?
Yes, my thanks to Ria Johnson, our Psychi rep. She provided some insights. I'm going to just share some of those insights. So she's indicated that they're working on building relationships that would foster increased diversity and inclusion within CSPP Alliant. For example, HBCUs, so historically Black colleges and universities, is one area of focus for increased engagement for 2021 and 2022. They have had recent activity that has included interaction with Grambling State University, Prairie View A&M, Bethune-Cookman, and Xavier University. However, not Howard University, my alma mater, which I would love to assist with. However, that is great. So they have connected with graduate education fairs and presentations on CSPP programs and offerings. So really that engagement with like, here's the next step. Here are programs that we offer, and exploratory conversations regarding partnerships and collaborations have begun specifically with Xavier University. So I think we have a point of solid contact in that space. Mm-hmm. They do participate in events that connect them to diverse populations and increase broad awareness of CSPP Alliant. For example, they have participated in the National Latinx Psychological Association, so NLPA 2021 convention as an exhibitor booth. So I don't know if they had a virtual space where folks can show up and sign in, or if they were in person. I think they were virtual this year. But that's a space, and they have done that with the Association of Black Psychologists in the past. So if there might be a satellite space where the conference is being held, so then representatives will show up and attend. Now that everything is so virtual, that's a prime opportunity that folks have used to be invited to these spaces and show up. They have also done this at APA, the larger convention, to again, be available and connect with folks about our offerings. Additionally, they are working more closely with Alliant's new Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, which is a great resource that we have recently really tried to infuse and build upon as one of their key initiatives for 2022. and they have a seat on the CSPP Diversity Recruitment Committee. So the fact that they're directly involved in it and can contribute to kind of the activities and ways of engagement, I think that's a critical piece. So lots of things that are brewing.
Okay, awesome. I imagine that gives other schools some ideas right there when they hear all of those things. So we've been pretty much specifically talking about graduate programs, but I imagine that these kind of ideas would apply beyond that as well. Where do you think work environments?
I think so too. So certainly for both graduate and undergraduates, I think they're similar, right? Similar tenets. I also think that these would certainly apply for working environments, even for like teaching and instruction within these spaces, to go to recruit folks then at the graduate level, right, to come and be a part of these spaces, or to pay listservs that have diverse right representation. Make sure like your announcements for jobs are on these spaces, or that you know of diverse ways of recruiting employees. But I think that these similar efforts can be applied in lots of fields.
Are diverse students, do you think, more likely to attend institutions with diverse faculty?
Yes, I certainly do think so. When students feel and see representation, they are more likely to attend. And then when there's even a diversity of folks training and clinical experience and their research kind of agendas, if it represents something that they're interested in, like, oh, you do that, or, oh, I can engage in this, then that will certainly perk their interest. The desire to be mentored by someone, or even seeing someone that looks like them, or that might have similar values or hold similar values. I think that's more encouragement for folks to show up. I also think, it's not just the faculty, it's the institution and the things that they may have to offer. So when there's diversity related scholarships or support center in place, when there's like, again, a established kind of mentorship, there's an infrastructure that says that we care, and here is what we are doing, in fact, to make sure that you're well prepared and that you're supported. I think all of those things also help. I also think like what folks are teaching, right? that it's not just these old white folks, or like these old ways of doing these things, but like when that's represented and it's not just one lesson out of the 13 that we have, but it's infused in all of the things that we do. Like when there's representation on lots of levels, I do think that's when they're engaging with clinical, work where folks, there's a diverse representation of folks and experiences. That also helps the diverse and marginalized students.
What do you think is the value of having diverse mentors in education and workplace?
So for me, I think the value of that is, again, the representation and maybe diversity of perspective and view. And I think that, and even kind of, when you have this representation outside of kind of maybe perhaps what you might think is typical, I think that brings about collaborative efforts, partnership, creativity, and how you might engage with like the field, collaborative efforts around even like presenting or writing, or just there can be lots of ways in which that's reflected. I think it enhances the quality of, for me, it certainly has enhanced the quality of life and work. It has encouraged me to like be in this place. I'm not leaving because I feel supported, and that there is some diverse representation, particularly in my department, where I feel like I don't have to like be the only one saying these things. There are lots of people that advocate in a similar way, not that we all hold the same views and we all think alike, but we have similar values. And we see and we understand, when things are not right, we all say things about it. It is not a solo voice. Like there's the unison, and then there's action, right? I have a wonderful program director who's about action, making sure like we take good care of our students, we take good care of ourselves as faculty, like that we're not overly stressed and strained, and we're not trying to solve all the world's problems, that we can collaboratively work together to address things. And I think our students feel that, they experience that too. So that part I'm really grateful for. And again, that effort I think it's because we have a pretty diverse faculty, and I think we strive to engage with that as well.
Can you think of any mentors at CSPP or really wherever that you just think are really good, strong mentors? And why do you think that is?
Yes. So I'm not gonna call people out because I feel some kind of way about that. uh, um, yes, at my institution, I feel like there are a number of folks who represent solid mentors who helped to champion my way, and being like who were here before I came. I will at least mention that Deborah Karahara was a solid mentor when I was a graduate student at CSPP, and had, like, even after I left, was a solid like source of support and encouragement, and represented feminist and multicultural leadership in so many ways. So that helped me to think of myself as like, oh, well, I could potentially be a leader. Oh, well, wait, I could teach the class she taught. Like, wait a minute, is that okay? And I sought mentorship from her through lots of kind of points in my life. And when she was like, well, I think you need to apply to CCP, you should come back, I willingly did that. I was like, oh my goodness, that's a beautiful give back. Why don't I? So that part, when you have those mentors who call you in and like, hey, I can see you doing this. I can see like your voice is needed here. She was that for me. And I see similar folks engaging in that same kind of spirit. Like, you know what, you can do this. You are needed. The work that you're engaged with is important. And that representation matters. And I see it, I feel it. And I see the same thing in my colleagues, the same spirit of like, they're doing this work. It's important. They're connecting with their students. It's so needed. And I've had some similar experiences in my own like graduate training. There were folks who helped to like get me along. And then there were folks even outside of that space. So in my home divisions, I'm 35, I'm 45, who were like, yes, we see you. You're flailing. Here are the things that you need to get through. My dear, let's move along here. Yep, you're doing all these wonderful leadership things. How you leading yourself out that dissertation? So, so like they were there to like help me think through like how to successfully like move forward, how to get through some of these hurdles that that I had some hard times getting over. I really cherish those experiences. And I try to like infuse that same like love and passion and support to my graduate students. So we do certainly exist. And I think, there are folks, again, there may be folks within your department and outside of your department. So I always say, don't just look to me. I cannot be the only, but there are so many of us. Tap into all of us, and we'll all rally together to support you.
So I'm thinking about students for this next question, and also really like potential employees who are thinking about trying to find a job. Yeah. What do you think they should do in order to try to figure out if a graduate program or if an employer is going to be accommodating for that?
And sometimes, again, that's a hard thing to do too, because people will put their best foot forward, right? Show you all the goods. So you can see what representation looks like. If they say their faculty is diverse and yet you don't see diverse representation, whatever diverse representation means to you, if that's not reflected there, that's something, that's a data point, that's information. If they have resources that are available and that are allocated to folks, and so they have some of the things that could be beneficial or helpful. They have infrastructure in place that could be beneficial for you. That's a data point too, right? If administration, if folks who are in staff positions, right? So like, I just look at all of the things. I try to see who kind of reflects me or who reflects the folks that I might be in community with. Are those folks represented? What do the students experience? So I talk to other students or encourage folks to talk to other students. What are they saying about the program? What does their affect look like? Are they looking like they are enjoying their spaces? Are they looking drained? Are they telling me like, don't come here? Data point, that's critical information, right? Are they being real with me about these things? And then I also kind of like, what is my gut telling me, right? Am I feeling like this doesn't feel right or something is suspicious about this? Trust your gut too. Those feelings are real. I would say look at the literature. Sometimes that's skewed. But what are the outcomes? How many folks of color are marginalized matriculating through their programs? How long does it take for them to get through? Do they have that information on hand?
Mm-hmm.
If they don't, right, they should. It's public information. Sometimes private institutions don't have it, but they can get you that information. That would be data point. For again, as a researcher, I want to see the stats. Let me see. Let's check this out. Right? How many folks really are there? How many folks are getting through? Are they getting through kind of on time? That might tell you about what might happen for you as you get through. And then for me too, it's places as well. If I'm in a place where I'm isolated, there are no other supports outside of that space, to be in that space for the length of a time of a program might be challenging. So how will you survive? What are some outside supports? Does the institution know about outside supports that might be aligned with your cultural experiences, your values? If they don't, is there a cultural center, someplace that a hub or someplace where you might find solace? Can they share that information with you, and can you connect with someone or folks or representatives there that could help to answer some of these questions or help be the buffer? That was definitely what I had to do at the University of North Dakota. That was a challenging experience, but they had a cultural center. They had buffers in place. It helped me, again, during my time there. I was certainly more aligned with my American Indian community than I was my African American community, because that was a community of one, me. So, but there was a Black Student Association that I quickly connected with, and a multicultural center that I aligned myself with and definitely used as a protective space throughout my time there. And the American Indian Center, that was, again, a really source of community and support for me. So I had to do that work on my end to be like, okay, if I'm going to be here, because they have lots of resources in place. If my education is going to be free, it's going to be 9 months of winter. I will invest in warm clothing as a Californian. I will figure out how to drive in the snow. So I said, like, I will do these things, and I will also find solace. I will also find community. I will also figure out how to protect myself in this space that might not, be intuitively supportive. And I had great folks within my department, and I made connections with the social justice counseling department. That was like a wonderful place of like resource and collaborative partnership around research. So that part. So I think you can make it in lots of places, but it is creating a safe hub and protective space for yourself wherever you go.
I don't have data for this next thought, but it's kind of my sense that there's more and more of a push for schools to be inclusive.
Yeah,
that's great, but I'm wondering, is it possible for schools to be, I don't know the exact word I'm looking for, too nice to diverse students? Do you have any tips to ensure that diverse students feel accepted and actually a part of the group and not like a trophy or something like that?
I think what you're hitting on a lot of things, Bradley. Like, yes, I know of many students who have been like the trophy. So come in and like entice with the gifts, right? And then expected to show up to certain meetings or like be the token, whatever it is in these spaces. And that burden is really difficult for graduate students who are like, I'm grateful to be here. And is this an expectation that I have to do these extra things in order to be here? Like, do you see that burden? Like, that to me is disturbing. That we honor these students with whatever it is, scholarship or whatever, and then the expectation is, the payoff is that we get to show you off, right? That's, again, hella disturbing, and I don't think is right. Yet institutions do these things, right? To say like, oh look, we're diverse, right? We're pushing these folks out here to show you that we're diverse, versus folks naturally being a part of things. If they want to be a part of policy making or things or whatever, like that should be a choice, not this feeling like you have to, or here, do these things now. I've certainly felt like that myself, like coming in early career, feeling like, okay, well, I'm interested in this. Actually, my true passion is intimate partner violence, but I can do diversity. Like I can teach multicultural classes. oh, you want me to show up and do this committee? Oh, well, now I'm the head of the committee. Oh, now, oh, wait a minute. The expectation is like, oh, now I have to do all these things. Oh, now I'm overtaxed and like burden. Like, so the burden of actually doing this to graduate students as they're also trying to get through their program. Yeah. So I think that is not the best thing to do, whether it's creating these folks who become like the trophies or our shining stars, but like a natural folding into the program without the expectation that these are the things that you need to do to pay back. So I think like there might be affinity groups where folks can have space or supportive spaces for students. And if they want to participate in any kind of leadership role, like allowing anyone to an opportunity to do that, and trying to encourage folks to not overburden themselves because, you know, their programs might be difficult to do. So not having things tied to the scholarships or tied to getting into programs, I think, and accountability around that, right? So I don't know if it's someone checking to see that this is not happening for students, or a way that students might be able to talk about their experiences and feel supported if they're feeling like overburdened with like these additional expectations. I wish that there was or whether that could be an APA thing of how you go through, right? Like this a part of their evaluation process or accreditation, that you're not taxing these students, that if you do get these reports from students about their institutions, that they will be penalized for doing these additional harms to students, and particularly like marginalized and ethnically diverse students. I mean, I think that stuff needs to be reported and it needs to be handled at a higher level. Because sometimes, right, institutions are like, well, we benefit from this, right? We're just showing off our students. This is the great way to, but you're also harming them if they're feeling like they have to do this. And this is an additional burden placed upon them in addition to their educational like requirements.
I noticed that I've been kind of lumping all the diverse people into this one group for this interview. And so I wanted to step back as we're getting closer to the end and just to see, did you have any exceptions or special instructions that you might share in order to be accommodating to specific groups of people, maybe African American, Latinx, American Indian?
I know. With there are lots of affinity groups, and I do tend to kind of like, well, here, this might work for all. And that isn't right. That's not true either. Right. So I think by accommodating folks, whether it's partnering with like the Association of Black Psychologists, Society of Indian Psychologists, National Latinx Psychological Association or AAPI, or other, even AMINA sites, I think that's the beauty of how we operate, and at LGBTQ, as well as folks who have these intersecting identities, right? There's lots of psychological supports and spaces that I think universities could actually benefit from partnering with, whether it's like consulting with like, how do we show up for our diverse student body? Or are there ways that we could collaborate on programming that could be beneficial for our students? I think that universities, institutions could do more, could reach out more, not just rely on APA. APA is a beautiful space too. Not that they don't have it all together, but that might be a good source too. Not, kind of outsourcing connections with some of the affinity psychology groups in order to actually like address groups of students' needs. So I know at least my local chapter of Association of Black Psychologists, we have partnered with Alliant, and particularly the Black Student Association. So the AB-Side Student Circle has a chapter on Alliance campus. And, when issues come up, right, so they will share things with the local San Diego chapter. And I just happen to be, right, a connection between both the student kind of liaison, faculty liaison. I am also for LA's campus. And I'm a member of the local San Diego chapter. So when there's an issue, we try to pull them in so that there's at least this external body who can kind of help hold folks accountable, who can be the voice, who can say, here's some alternative options. Here's some things to think about in ways that you might support, our Black students. I think those similar partnerships need to happen with other affinity groups and other intersecting identity groups, because things always happen, right? There's missteps, there's folks who need representation and support. But I think more of that can happen. I'm also a member of, I cannot not be remiss not to say, like, I'm a co-chair of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, along with my colleague, Dr. Jan Estriado. So we are part of this body of support for the PsyD department in the San Diego campus. And I think that's a good space too. So that's kind of why I use that kind of universal language too, because we're dealing with lots of students in that space. But I feel like even that, like, that's a great space to help address students' needs and help address faculty needs and kind of structural issues within our department. So having spaces where you create these kind of checkpoints, right, around intersectionality, I think is critical for many departments. And we're able to get workload credit, so we're getting paid to do this work. It's not this voluntary something. I think that's an important piece too.
So this is my last question, and I ask this one quite a bit, and that's the question of why does all this matter? And I always kind of try to work it in there because in these days with the culture the way that it is, there is sometimes indifference or even resistance to diversity type programs like this. And so I guess my question this time is, what is the importance or rewards, effects, benefits of having a more diverse graduate school program?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think this matters because, I mean, we're seeing why it doesn't matter, right? We see this pandemic killing folks and the racial pandemic doing the same thing, and the amounts of harm and, right, mental instability that touches everybody, not just one section of the population who's going to get served. It hits everyone. And if we are not all well equipped and informed about how to show up, how to do this really difficult work, how to be these social justice and culturally informed, trauma informed clinicians in this diverse space that we occupy and live with together, then, like, if folk don't see how we're all interconnected and how we do really need to show up in more informed ways, then we're just looking at more of the same. We're looking at, like, folks not accessing help, folks not recognizing how, right, this pandemic is shining a light on disparities in so many ways. So I think, again, the beauty of having many of us at the table, many of us engage in this work, is that folks will come up with creative ways of intervening. Folks will come up with creative ways of researching. Folks will come up with creative ways of doing this much needed work. And that the burden will not be on a few folks who are, like, championing it, but it'll be lighter because all of us will be a part of it. All of us will find meaning in this. That it's not charged to just a few of us, that it's all of us in this field that need to be engaged in this really thoughtful, critical effort.
You've just listened to another episode of Psych Everywhere. This episode was made possible through a special Psych-I sponsorship with CSPP Alliant International University. Founded in 1969, CSPP was one of the nation's first independent schools of professional psychology. Today, CSPP continues its commitment to preparing the next generation of mental health professionals and advocates. Their dedication to ensuring every community's access to quality mental health care extends from integrated care to inclusive family therapy. Explore their programs at https://discover.alliant.edu/psychi/home. You can also find this link in the show notes for this episode. Also, if you have any questions for Dr. Green, I will include her email in the show notes as well. It's jgreen@alliant.edu. If you enjoyed this episode, then I think you'll like this next announcement too. Do you remember the episode we released in March with Dr. Stephen Roberts? That was the one about identifying and thwarting racism within psychology science itself. As it so happens, the new editor of Psych-I Journal of Psychological Research, Dr. Stephen Rouse, has been inspired to follow Dr. Roberts' suggestions in order to diversify psychology. He set 4 new goals for the journal, and today I'd like to talk to you about the 4th one, which is a commitment to actively recruit a diverse pool of manuscript reviewers. As written in the Psych-I Journal's purpose statement, our journal is dedicated to increasing its scope and relevance by accepting and involving diverse people of varied racial, ethnic, gender identity, sexual orientation, religious, and social class backgrounds, among many others. If you have a doctoral degree in psychology or a similar field, I hope you'll take a moment to become a part of our reviewer team. The journal's online portal system will allow you to submit specific subject areas in psychology that you'd feel comfortable reviewing for. You can set unavailability dates anytime so we'll know when not to contact you. And you'll receive basic instructions and a template review form in order to save you time during your review. Importantly, we also provide guidance on crafting positive and constructive reviewer feedback. So, whether you're an experienced reviewer or new to the process, to become a reviewer for Psychi Journal, email steve.rouse@pepperdine.edu. And of course, if you'd like to learn more about the journal, you can always visit www.psychi.org/journal_main. Okay, last but not least, if you haven't already subscribed to Psych Everywhere, go ahead and follow us wherever you listen to podcasts. Also, tell a friend and colleague about the show. Word of mouth for podcast is a huge help. So, share what you learned during your bus ride to work or even in your classes. You can also follow us on Twitter at Psychi Podcast and leave a review at Apple Podcast or again wherever you go for podcast. You'll absolutely make my day. And more importantly, you'll be helping us to get Psych everywhere. Okay, I guess that's all for now. I'll talk to you again soon. Copyright 2021, Psychi, the International Honor Society in Psychology. All rights reserved.